In this episode, we're talking about how one entrepreneur lived through cancer, a Ponzi scheme, was a clown at one point, and ended up becoming a millionaire. So if you want to hear this story, keep listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, I have the privilege and the honor to interview one of my good buddies, someone who's helped me out in a lot of different ways. Come on, tell his story, and hopefully help you out in the same way. And that person is none other than Mel Abraham. Mel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brandon, how are you doing? So good to be here. Thanks for getting me on here.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for being here. I know what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk, for lack of a better word, we're going to talk money and business and that type of stuff. But let's give someone a little bit of, just to give everyone who may not know who you are, a little context of who you are and what you do. Can you just give a little quick description of that?
Yeah, I'm a CPA by education. So I started down the boring left brain route of ticking and tying numbers. But bottom line is that the entrepreneurial spirit just welled up in me, and I couldn't take it any longer. So I've been an entrepreneur for decades. This will age me. I went out on my own in 1989. Although my first entrepreneurial endeavor was when I was 11 years old. So
wow. And Mel, in 1989, I was 6 years old. Just to just to make you feel a little older than you. Dang
it! Yeah, and so I stayed in the CPA realm, but I was really buying and selling businesses, valuing businesses, and consulting to build businesses for years, and still do that today. But by and large, what drives me and what I'm obsessed with is really helping people kind of dust their dreams off as an entrepreneur and say, how do we live a life that is meaningful and build a business that gives us the life that we want, that vision, and gives that financial freedom. So I've worked with thought leaders, I speak, and have a international best-selling book, a #1 best-selling book on Barnes & Noble and USA Today called The Entrepreneur Solution. And I just, that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's been a crazy, crazy journey, as you know, and there's plenty of lessons along the way. Most of the lessons came out of my total stupidity and mistakes that I made.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into it, because there's so many things here. Like, a lot of people don't know, you're best friends with Brendan Burchard. And so you speak a lot at his events. You're a best-selling author. I think it's safe to assume cancer survivor as well. Veteran entrepreneur. Like, there's so many things, and you're often labeled as like the Swiss Army knife of entrepreneurs because you have so many skills and trades. But you said your first entrepreneurial journey started at 11. What were you doing at 11 years old?
So I was sitting with I remember sitting with my dad watching an old movie. Back then it was Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis in the very first movie, black and white movie that was done about Harry Houdini. Mm-hmm. And I was just intrigued by this guy that no chains could hold and no boxes could hold. And so I started to get intrigued with what he did, how he did it, how he built his career. I mean, he was an amazing showman. So I started studying that. And that's what got me into magic, is that I fell in love with magic. And back in the day, there was this magic shop, but it was all the way across the valley. And back then, we had the rapid transit district, basically a bus. And, my parents allowed me to walk 2 blocks to the bus, take the bus all the way across the valley, and sit at the magic shop all day, and then take the bus home. And
oh my gosh, at 11?
Literally at 10, 11 years old, would hang out during the summer months at the magic shop. And through that, I was hearing people coming in and this and that, and I hear someone talking, and about how he's doing shows and all that. And so I asked the guy that I knew at the magic shop, and I go, dude, I actually make money doing this? And he said, yeah. I said, you mean it's not like just a hobby? He says, no, you can make money doing this. Wow. And from there I said, okay. So I went out and started to do magic shows for kids' birthdays I was 11 years old and I was getting paid $50 for a half-hour show. I had to do the balloon animals and the whole bit, but I was getting $50 a show for 30 minutes at 11 years old.
So, okay, a couple questions on that. First one is, you were just a 10-year-old kid that would go to his shop and just hang out at the shop. Did the owner ever get like annoyed that this kid kept showing up at his shop every single day and just hanging out?
They seemed to be okay with it. They never said anything.
I could just imagine being the magic shop owner. It's like, what is this kid that keeps just hanging out here all day? Never buys anything. He just sits here and does magic all day. But that's pretty, I'm sure they enjoyed it. My next question is, like, when you started doing these magic shows, how did you get to the thing? Like, did your parents drive you around? Were you taking the bus? What were you doing?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did is part of the magic shows, some of them I did as a clown. So
that was my next question. Were you dressed up as a clown?
Yeah. Which listen, this is about, know your market. Okay. Yep. I didn't realize that kids were scared of clowns. So it really made it difficult at times when your whole audience is crying and I'm like, going, oh man.
Yeah. Tough crowd.
But I had such supportive parents. My mom was the one that sewed and made my clown outfit. I still have it today. I don't fit in it. I still have it though.
Yeah.
And she would drive me around. If these were, my dad or my mom would drive me to the shows and I did things at parks and all that stuff. And so they were really great about allowing me to kind of do that.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then how long did you do that for?
I did it for a good number of years until I started to get more involved in sports. So I'm going to say at least 3 or 4 years. In fact, I became a junior member at the Magic Castle, which I'm still a member of the Magic Castle today.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I remember that. I remember James was like, guess where I'm going? I'm like, where? He's like, the Magic Castle. I'm like, with who? He's like, Mel, he's a member. I'm like, all right. I need to work on Mel taking me to the Magic Castle.
We got to get you there.
One day. Okay. So you're 11 years old, you got into sports. What started to happen from there? Because I would imagine you went to school, college, all that stuff, and then eventually started something else, right?
Yeah. So primarily once I hit high school, I played football. I was on the track team. And so my parents said, as long as you're getting good grades and you're doing sports, don't worry about working. Don't worry about any of that stuff. We'll make sure that you're taking care of. So that's probably my primary focus in high school and everything was, other than girls, was sports and grades. And then when I went to college, I had the fortunate blessing of going to work for a CPA. It was an individual CPA, but he was an entrepreneurial CPA. So this was a guy that was doing real estate development and real estate investments. He was doing other deals. So I was exposed to negotiating and deals and entrepreneurship. And he nurtured me through college and always put in my head, he said, go to the big firms, get the education, get the experience, but always find a way to go do it on your own.
Yeah. And why is that? Just more freedom, time and money freedom?
Yeah.
Yeah, because my brother worked at one of those big firms for a while, and it was like 80, 100-hour weeks. Sometimes you're putting in hours that you're not getting paid for because a project only has a certain amount of hours that are unrealistic. Like it seems pretty brutal to be working for those big companies.
When you look at the hours and everything, the education and experience was great, but the time was brutal. And that's actually how I left, is that I was in downtown Los Angeles. It was at 10 o'clock at night. I was working late on a Friday night again. And I was staring out at the skyline of downtown LA, which actually is not bad to look at. But in that moment, I turned around and I saw the partner that I did a lot of work for, Tom, and he was sitting at his desk. He was overweight. He was stressed out and probably an inch or two away from a heart attack. He didn't have a great relationship. And I thought, there sits my future if I stay on this track. And I still remember that day vividly, turning around and walking into his office and saying, I'm going to quit. Because I'm living someone else's life. I'm on the journey and the pathway that most accountants go on, and this isn't my path.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting because this is when all the entrepreneurs that we talk to usually have that moment where they just like, okay, there's the moment. And I think the difference between entrepreneurs and someone who's not an entrepreneur is people will convince themselves that that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
I know this isn't totally what I want, but that's okay. Or the mind will tell them that's what's realistic, or it's unrealistic to do something else. But an entrepreneur is someone who's just like, nope, I'm like, that's it, line in the sand. I've crossed that line. And I was actually talking to someone today. We talked about a death meditation where you're like sitting there and you meditate and you're watching your death and your funeral, and like, are you happy with the life that you created? Are people saying the things that you want them to say? And if not, then it's time to change. And I think that's one of the biggest traits that entrepreneurs can have, is just like, you want something better and you're willing to just go after it no matter what the consequence is. Well, and it seems like that's what that moment was for you.
It was. And I think that so often, you think about, I was one of the things that I did at one point. I was a adjunct professor at the University of San Diego Law School. And I remember the very last day of the law school, I would bring in the pizza, they would bring in the beer,
yeah,
and we would talk. And I'd literally, they just finished and they spent a ton of money to get their degree. And I'm teaching entrepreneurship and valuation to them. And I said to them, I said, here's something, and this is the most important thing that I'm going to teach you the whole semester. And that is, at some point, you might, maybe not, but you might come in your career and become miserable with it, where you don't enjoy it anymore, where, not the every once in a while, oh God, I hate this type of thing, but where it's keeping you up at night and you're miserable. And I said, that happens, no matter what you spent here, no matter how much time you've done, no matter what the expectations are, it's time to leave. It's time to get out. It's time to find that journey because what are we going to do? We spend our life in a career that we absolutely detest just because we happened to pick a major when we were younger. And so now we're sentenced to a life imprisonment. No, I don't think so.
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing I have with college. I'm not the biggest supporter of college, although I know it's necessary and plays a role in different ways and for different industries. But, you're going in, you're 19, 20 years old, and you're like told, pick the thing that you want to do for the rest of your life. Like, you're a kid, you don't know what that's going to be. And then they charge you $100,000 or whatever it is for this thing. And now you're, like you said, you're like trapped in this box of, I have to do this because I spent all this money. And it's a decision you made when you were a kid. It's insane. So I'm glad that you were able to share that you just made the decision. I don't want that. I'm done. Boom. You moved on to something else. So what did you move on to?
So doing some of the financial work that I do today, I did something that I would never recommend anyone do. I cashed out my IRA account and I left and went to Japan.
Oh, I didn't know that.
To Japan it was about 5.5 months. And wow. I just went to Japan, and I literally, I was one of the only non-Japanese in a small town 2 hours north of Tokyo, which meant I was the hairiest and the tallest. And I trained twice a day in a small dojo, a training hall with a martial arts, my martial arts instructor, who was the 17th generation. He's of a bloodline, 17th generation samurai. And so I literally took off and just trained in Japan for months, doing nothing but, I would bike to the dojo. I was in a small little apartment and just lived like the villager there and going and training.
That's amazing. But why that? I mean, did you just get an itch one day to be like, oh, I'm going to go do that? Or were you already into that?
Oh, I had already been training in the martial arts for many, many years. And so my instructor lived in Japan and trained under him. And so I said, why don't I go to the source? Why don't I go train with the Grand Master? And because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. I just knew when I left that firm, I knew that I wanted to have an impact. I knew that I had skills and talents and information and knowledge that could serve people. And I just felt that I wasn't doing it. So said, well, let me go take some time for me. Let's go discover me and what's important. And so I spent 4 or 5 months getting choked out, hit, moved around, thrown around.
Was it scary for you to like make that move all the way to Japan?
It was a little anxiety in the sense that I didn't know my way around. In fact, I remember Sensei sent me the picture of the train station, the kanji, the Japanese characters, because nothing was in English there. And so I'm on the train picking up the picture going, yeah, that's it. Time to get off. And I left in December. So this is me. I'm born and raised in California. All right. Yeah. So to me, it's always sunny. Yeah. Well, did you know that in December there's snow on the ground in Japan?
Sounds crazy.
Oh my God. So I show up back then, this is aging me again, with my 501 jeans on, my tennis shoes, and a t-shirt. And,
oh my gosh.
And I'm looking around going, there's snow on the ground and I ain't got no jacket.
Oh my gosh. It's crazy. Wow. So you're there for 5.5 months, training, doing all that stuff. You had drained your retirement account, which you said was a bad idea. Why is that a bad idea?
Only because knowing what it could have grown to had I left it there today, I lost all of that earnings growth and everything.
Gotcha.
So from a financial, it wasn't a great financial decision, but from a life decision, I loved every moment of doing it.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say is like, if from a financial standpoint, I can totally get it. But couldn't we argue at the same time that had you not done that, you wouldn't have had that experience in Japan? Or was there a way to do it without draining the bank account?
I probably could have. Here's what it would have amounted to. I would have put it on a credit card. And the difference between a credit card and draining the IRA account is I would have paid interest. I wouldn't have paid the taxes and the penalties for the early withdrawal out of the IRA. So it would have been cheaper for me if I paid, making sure that I paid the credit card off, to do it on a credit card than it would have been to cash out the IRA. I mean, the 401k. So.
And that's what I love about you. It's like figuring out the smart way financially to make things happen. And how do we move it for the accomplish something with the most amount of gain that you can actually get. Okay, great. So you come back, and I'm assuming this is when you start your, is it called practice, or is it called?
Yeah, it's a practice. It's a firm. I actually, when I came back, I got an offer to join a small firm and become a partner, and then become the managing partner, which is what I ended up doing around 1990. Yeah. And so I had a couple of partners in that firm, and I was building the firm and building my practice area in the firm from that time forward. And then, and that was when I started to get into the speaking and writing and some of that stuff, because I didn't know any other way to get myself out there. One of the challenges in the CPA world is that, and some of the listeners may feel challenged with this too, is that, you talk about accountants, they're bean counters. And so they're seen as a commodity, and they have the worst business model in the world. Let's swap hours for dollars. I mean, you talk about devaluing what you do, your knowledge, your wisdom. That's probably the easiest way to do it. And so I had to find a way to set myself apart from the rest that were just saying, here's my hourly rate. And so I found a niche that I was going to focus in on, which happened to be valuations. And I said, all right, no one was going to hire me. The attorneys didn't want to hire me because they said, you don't have any experience. So I thought, how do I get the experience? How do I get them to believe I had the experience at least? And so they'll talk to me. And so what I did, and it was intentional, but I didn't know how well it would work. Is that I said, well, I'm just going to go out and start speaking. Because when you start speaking, one, it's going to force me to be at the leading edge of my category, because people are going to fire questions at me, and it's going to force me to prepare in a much different way. And two, they get a chance to see me in a different light. They see me as an authority. And And that's literally how I ended up building a national presence in the valuation world and the valuation industry is using, because back then we didn't have internet. We didn't have any of that stuff. So I had to do it the old fashioned way.
Yeah. And so you started to build your practice by speaking. How did you even get speaking gigs anyways? Like, were you putting on your own events or getting invited?
Yeah, well, so what I did is I started out locally by doing reach outs to bar associations, because bar associations were having lunch meetings and they always wanted a speaker.
Yeah.
And so I would get a couple of those under my belt where I was doing lunch speaking, which sometimes is the worst because the clanging the plates and all that stuff. But so I did the lunch speaking and then Chamber of Commerce. And then what really started to, do it for me is I then did an outreach. I actually had someone do some research and get all of the contact information for the major metropolitan CPA societies. I wanted their executive officer, their meetings coordinator, and their conference coordinator, and their conference chairman. So back then it was their name, address, and phone number, because that's all we did. So I created a mail campaign with them that basically said, introduced myself, sent them an article, a short 500-word article saying, I thought that this would be of help to your members. If it is, do me a favor, go ahead and publish it in your journal. Just do me a favor, please keep the byline in. Okay. And by the way, here's a couple of presentations that I do and other articles that I have. If you think it would be beneficial for you or your members for me to be a speaker at one of your conferences, I'd love to have the opportunity to do that. Well, that's what got me on the speaking circuit. And I literally started to speak at almost every major conference around the country for each of the CPA societies for many years. And so I became known as a speaker in that industry. So when valuation came up, they said, let's get Mel in. So national organizations, bar associations, and that type of thing. So it immediately transformed how they saw me in the marketplace.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so smart. I mean, that's what we talk about with messaging is finding, and marketing is finding those unique angles or those like outside the box thinking strategies, processes that you can do that, like, we call it stop the scroll, but essentially it's the pattern interrupts. Like no one else is probably sending out articles and outreach and doing all of this stuff. It's just a different way to gain the traction in the marketing.
My partners at the time, because they were typical traditional accountants, were kind of going, accountants don't do this. This is not the way we do business. I said, that's a clear sign of why you should be doing it. Exactly.
That's
where's the
point. I know. That's the point. That's great. I don't want to do the things that they're all doing because I don't want that life. I love that. So everything seems to be going well, but I know, because I know your story. I know we're coming up to a point where there's a moment with your son that changed everything. I believe this is right around that time. And there's also some friction between the partners at the same time, correct?
Yeah. So this whole idea of I was doing things different than most of the people in the industry, and I was growing and doing my own thing, created a separation between my partners and I, where they said, look, we're traditional accountants. We're not sure what you're doing. Now, I was bringing in business. I was doing all this stuff and I was still billing close to the same amount as them. So it wasn't like I was just traveling on their dime.
Right.
But they literally came to me, and now we're in 96 time frame, and said, we don't want to be partners with you anymore. And they literally pushed me out the door and said, we'll figure out how to separate. And really what started this whole thing was they came to me and said, we don't want to pay for you to go speak. I was going to go speak at a conference in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah.
And he said, and they said, there's nothing that's going to come out of Little Rock, Arkansas, and you're going to take time away from the firm. You're going to do that. And I said, but wait a second. These are 350 attorneys in a room that I have as a captive audience. They don't do what I do, but they need what I do.
Right.
They said, well, we're not paying for it. So I said, great. When I get back, we'll talk about the separation, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And so I went and did that, and literally it proved my point, but we still separated, is that by the time I got back on, I'm getting off the plane in LA, one of the attorneys in that audience had called me up and said, watch your session. It was an amazing session. I have a client.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to fly back out to Arkansas because I need you to do work. Now, this was a client that was a founder of what is now a New York Stock Exchange company.
Wow.
And was one of the wealthiest people in Arkansas, not the Walmart family, but a different family. That ultimately what that led to, and this is the kind of thing that I think most of us don't think about. We got to think about our businesses as bamboo. We plant the seeds of bamboo and we nurture it for a period of years, not knowing when it's going to grow, but when it grows, it sprouts up really fast. I mean, that's the way bamboo does it. It gestates under the ground for as much as 3 years. And then within 90 days, it's fully grown.
Whoa.
And we don't have the patience. We have the beanstalk syndrome, I call it, where I said, let's throw the beans out, go to sleep and wake up and should be fully grown. And it's not the way business is. But that one presentation landed me annual clients in Arkansas because the law firms in Arkansas got to know me. So I was probably doing anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000 of work in Arkansas every single year from that moment forward.
Wow. That's just crazy. And it reminds me of an interview we did with a guy named Jared who, no online presence, but he does really well, like marketing for people. And he just hops around and finds all these opportunities. And it reminds me of him a little bit because that's kind of what he talks about. He talks about doing these things. He said, basically, your number one thing you need to do is make the phone ring. Like, that's it. He's like, just make the phone ring. Just figure out how to make the phone ring. You're never going to be hurting for money. And that's the same opportunity you saw. It's like, we have 350 people in a room listening to me talk who need and that's the same thing. Just like you're figuring out how to get in front of people, knowing that it's going to lead to bigger, better things. Then we had a real estate agent on the call, actually just interviewed him right before you, who said the exact same thing as you. He's like, I just started out and just started planting these seeds. Like I just door knocking and just grinding away. And he's like, and then eventually the seeds that you plant start to bloom. But most people will never stay around to see the things start to bloom. And that's exactly what you got to experience.
Yeah, they don't. And the other thing I think that helped is that you kind of mentioned this earlier, is that I didn't speak like the rest of the accountants.
Yeah.
You know, I most of them at the conferences would stand behind the podium and everything. And I said, give me a wireless mic and let me roll. And they're kind of going, where did this guy come from?
Yeah.
And it was just
you're
me.
a speaker. You're a professional speaker.
Yeah. So
yeah, I love that. So I know. So did you split on your own at that point? Then is that what happened?
Yeah. So we split up. But when we split, I left everything behind. I had no clients. I had no work backlog. I had no cash flow because except for this one client that I got booked on for coming out of Arkansas, and I had nothing. But that was the same year that I just purchased a house not far from you, and so I was $300,000+ in debt, and at the same time, that happened to be the same year that I got. I became a single full-time dad. It was, I got custody of my son and he was, 5.5 years old. So here I was, $300,000 in debt, not sure what I'm going to do and trying to figure out how do I take care of the greatest gift that was given to me. And that is to be a father and yet serve the dream of being an entrepreneur and making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah. And what was it like? I mean, that's so much to take on. Like I have 3 kids. I can't imagine being a single parent out there while trying to build a business, especially buying a new house. It seems incredibly stressful and filled with like a lot of worry and stuff. How did the business do at that moment? I'm assuming it started to grow.
It did. I did what most entrepreneurs do. I dug my heels in. I put my head down and said, I can make this work. I can make this work. So I started running. I started doing the same thing that I was doing to build the business before, but now I was doing it on my own. So the challenge was that, I was a single full-time dad. I had a responsibility. Enter my parents who were amazing during this time, supporting me again, where for Jeremy's sake, they didn't live too far from us, but when I would travel to speak, they would come and stay at our house. So his his pattern wasn't interrupted. His life, his normal kind of routine wasn't interrupted.
Yeah.
But it was one day that really put it in perspective. Jeremy, I put an office in the home. I started working from home, and he came home from school one day, and he was really excited. He goes, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, I drew a picture of you at school today." And so it was like the kid on the morning of their birthday, and they see the gifts, and they're trying to, and they're so you can't do anything but just stop everything and give them your undivided attention. And
right.
he asked me this picture he drew, and it was in blue felt tip pen, and it was stick figure, and it was me standing in front of two computer screens with a phone in each ear and another phone on the desk ringing. And that was it was a hurtful moment. It was a realization moment. It was a reflection moment, but it was the moment that a 6-year-old boy that probably taught me the greatest thing that I could have been taught about business, because it would have been easy for me to look at him and go, dude, I get it. I'm working hard, but this is for us. This is, the profits are going to be able to pay the house. It's going to get you to travel. It's going to get you to do all these things and talk about how this was rationalized, how this was so important for him. But, after reflecting on it, I realized he didn't care about my profits. He cared about my presence. He cared about the fact that I was there. And that's when it really kind of sat back and says, because then I had a whole lot of people talking to me, the traditional thought of, oh, well, you got to get work-life balance, Mel. You got to get work-life balance. And I'm going, the work-life balance it's a myth. It's can I say it? It's a load of crap.
Yeah.
People have been fed. There is no work-life. Think about living in a bucket called work for 8-10 hours a day. And then you run home and you're a different personality, and you're in a bucket called life. And then you have a bucket called hobbies, and you're living in this bifurcated life, and the kind of friction and stress that can put you in. And that's when I said, it's not about work-life balance that matters. It's about work-life harmony. It's about finding harmony and being intentional in the things that you do that matter. And so I had to look at business and say, is it possible for the dream to be an entrepreneur and serve society and make a difference in people's lives to coexist with the responsibility and the gift of being a parent? And that's when I started to try and reinvent this whole idea of how a CPA and evaluation guy would do things. And I mean, I can certainly tell you that the short answer is yes, it is possible. Yeah.
And I think it takes a lot of kind of just mind shift thinking too, or mindset shifting and changing the way you look at things. Cause I know for me, it's a very similar thing. And kids grow up so fast too. Like, I can't believe Will's already 7. And I know I'm admitting, like, the first couple of years of his life, it was a lot of me just putting my head down and grinding with the excuse of, I'm doing this for us. But it's like, he doesn't care. Like, he's not going to look back at that and go, my dad wasn't around because he was doing stuff for us. He's going to look at it as my dad was gone or not doing whatever. And so as parents, we have to be very careful and aware of that. And I think now, like, that's been one of my biggest inspirations for building out more systems and a team and stuff like that, is to just free me up to spend time with the family.
You never replace it. And I get that there's probably people out there saying that's easy for you to say, and we got bills to pay and all that. And some of it is not just the quantity of time, it's really the quality of time. I mean, how many people are spending time together, but they're preoccupied, they're distracted, and they're not present.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You could work 12 hours in a day, come home, and you get 45 minutes with your children. But if there's a 45 solid minutes where everything is gone and it's just them, that's what they want. That's what they're looking for. That sounds like a huge realization and time for reflection. And basically, I'm assuming pivoting or transitioning to something else or adjusting what you were doing. Is that what you did?
Yeah. So I stayed in the valuation realm for a bit, but this is when I started to look at it and say, one, I enjoy speaking.
Yeah.
And it was about that time that I started to look at, someone said, you can make money speaking. And I go, what? And this is another, I think, lesson for people to think about is I was out speaking, I was writing, I was doing workshops, I was doing all these things, and none of it was I getting paid for.
Yeah.
And I was doing all of that to get the paid gig. So I was doing 5 or 6 things to get paid once. Mm. And someone said to me and said, Mel, you're pretty good as a speaker. You could make money as a speaker. And I go, wait. People will pay me to talk? I said, I like to talk.
Sign me up.
Yeah. And so they say, he goes, check out the National Speakers Association. And so I started to go to the National Speakers Association stuff. And I'm going, there's an industry called the speaking industry. Yeah. Because I was an accountant and speaking was simply a tool to build a business. Yeah. But then I understood, I started to say, wait a second. If I'm trying to get the big job, the project, but if in the process of getting the project, I speak and I get paid. Yeah. I write and I get paid. I do a workshop and I get paid. I do an interview and I get paid. Then I'm getting cash flow from beginning to the end. Yeah. And now instead of getting paid one way, I'm getting paid 4 or 5 ways for the same knowledge, the same skill, and the same information. And that's when things started to shift completely for me, is because I started to look at how do I leverage my knowledge and my and my work in a way that do it once and get paid multiple ways. Yeah. And what did that lead you to? That's what led me to the idea of online, because now all of a sudden online started to happen, and the idea of doing courses, doing programs, and saying, all right, so just the same as a service professional right now, most people think that they don't have inventory. You're a coach. I don't have inventory. No, you do have inventory. In fact, your inventory is much more fungible, if you will, than any other inventory. Because if I was selling pens, I can put the pen on the shelf, and assuming the ink doesn't dry, a week later I can sell it. Right. But if you're selling hours, you can't put the hour on the shelf and a week later sell it. Right. Or can you? And the way you do it is by creating programs that they can take that knowledge off the shelf and watch, go through, and participate in. And that's what I realized, that this is the way to leverage a time for dollars type of model. So I create the program, and now we continue to sell the program repeatedly. So I've leveraged my time in the process. God, yeah, I love that. And I think everyone listening here is well aware that we can sell courses, programs, and all that stuff too. And if you're not, pay attention, because what Mel is telling you is, if you're like in a business where you're grinding away and you're just trading time for dollars, you can take what you know, package it up in the program, and basically teach people whatever it is that you know, or give them some sort of transformation. And it doesn't require any fulfillment, or very little fulfillment from you. And really what it does is it takes away the time for dollars. You're making money without it requiring a direct trade for your time. Mel, is it safe to assume, or to say, that with the evaluation business, it made you a millionaire? Like, you made millions doing that? It gave me the vehicle to make the millions. It was everything I did with it and how I treated the money coming in that allowed me to build the wealth. Okay. And I know somewhere in there, so my next question is, how did you start to build the wealth? And I know at one point you actually part of a Ponzi scheme, right? Like a victim, that you weren't running it. Yeah. Let's clarify. I was victimized by a Ponzi scheme. I wasn't a sponsor of a Ponzi scheme. So let's start with whatever side of that you think is more relevant or came first, is like building the wealth, and then the story of how the Ponzi scheme, like being a victim of that, came into play. Well, I think that this kind of actually goes back to the whole Jeremy thing. Is I realized that one of the Jeremy being my son, because I don't know that we mentioned his name, but I realized as part of that whole thing of how do I get my time back so I can spend it with my son was I needed to find some financial independence. I needed to have some way of doing that. And so it was then when I started to look at, all right, I need to build a financial machine that's going to support me where it doesn't require my hours all the time also. So if I'm leveraging my earnings capability by leveraging my knowledge in different formats, I can also take the cash that was coming in and allocate a portion of it to create a financial machine that will generate income over time. So I was investing. So, it was just at that time for many years, it was just Jeremy and myself and in this house, and we weren't living crazy high on the hog. So I had, and there's something that I teach people called leapfrog funding, I call it. Mm-hmm. In my kind of business, I get, and this is something that people that do launches should be thinking about, and they don't, is that it was project driven. So I could literally get $100,000 project in, a $50,000 project in, a $20,000 project in, but my bills for the month might be only 10. And so a lot of times what people will do is they'll go, woohoo, and go celebrate, which is totally fine. But just like planning a launch, what I did is I said, great, I'm going to carve off a big chunk and leapfrog fund my future. Yeah. So if I got $100,000 in, I would carve away 50 of it and put it into an investment account. Okay. And I would say that if you're planning a launch, most of the time we plan a launch, we say, here's what our revenues are, here's what my ad spend and my ROI should be, and my earnings per lead, my cost per lead, and all that stuff. We fail as entrepreneurs many times to plan for two things. One is taxes. Yeah. And two is investment. So I would say, as part of your launch plan, to know that if I'm doing a $100,000 launch, a $500,000 launch, that there's a chunk, and you plan for it up front, that's going to get stripped away to go towards taxes. And another chunk that's going to get stripped away goes towards your financial future. So it's embedded in the plan to leapfrog you every time you get chunks of money in, because that's what happens with entrepreneurs. A lot of times it's not consistent every month.
Right. And I can tell you guys firsthand, this is like one of the things that Mel has helped me with the most. And to be honest with you, this is probably why we got into trouble back in 2016 or whenever it was. And like, we did 500,000 in revenue, and I just gave up everything. It really was like feast and famine. It was like launch, pay the revenue, spend some money, launch. It was just like, but the thing is like one hiccup and you're toast, like you're done. And we've obviously changed a lot of things. And last year we made over 6 figures just off of investment stuff last year, and had nothing, and it was all passive. It has nothing to do with, for us, a lot of it came from real estate, but it had nothing to do with my business. It had nothing to do with whatever, but it was created and funded with money that was generated from the business. And this is what Mel was talking about. So Mel, that makes so much sense. And I want to dig a little bit more into that, but let's hop over to the fun stuff and talk about how you got scammed. When is this coming to play?
So here's what ends up happening. So you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And what ends up happening is that when you get successful, or when you start to see success, then there are people that will come out and say, I have an opportunity. Have I got a deal for you? Yeah. And so a friend who had been investing with this guy, and he's a family guy. He's a family dude. You meet him. He's a nice guy. He's got 4 kids, living in Malibu, and everything's cool. And I meet him, and he's nice, and he's got these transactions, these deals that he's doing. And he says, we make about 20% every 8 to 12 weeks. And I go, that sounds good, Yeah. So, and I had investing rules. I had all of that, and I threw it out the window because I got enticed and Ponzi and con men and women, because it's not sexist at all. They understand the psychological triggers that play in there. And so I invested. This friend brought me in. I invested. I brought another friend in. So there was 3 of us that we knew each other that were in it. And so they play the game. Now, the whole idea of a Ponzi scheme is that they get early investors in, they promise them a return, and then they get other investors in to pay the return to the other ones, because now the other ones are going, wow, I got money back. Yeah. And you're right, this works. And then they go tell their friends who tell their friends and tell their friends, until it gets so large and so big, it can't be controlled. And or the market turns in a way that people start to have problems and they want to cash out.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's what happened with Bernie Madoff. And so this guy, between me and my two buddies, $4.5 million.
Wow.
And I lost 1/3 of everything I owned. And this was 2005 when that happened.
Wow. That's unbelievable. And it's just crazy too, because, you're obviously very careful with what you do, and you had your investing rules and you had all of that stuff, and you still kind of, went into this not really seeing everything. And so did that teach you? I'm sure it taught you a lot of different lessons and stuff. What would you say was the biggest lesson you learned from it?
I think there's a couple things. One, I did see the things and I ignored them. So being real. So the first thing I had to do is, and some people may be feeling this now, given the pandemic and everything, is that I needed to not beat myself up with this bad stick of the past.
Right.
Because it wasn't going to serve me.
Yeah.
Between the three of us, one of my buddies was retired. So all he did was shrink his lifestyle down and continue living. Okay. The other one, he just kind of spiraled into anger and resentment, and he destroyed his marriage, he destroyed his business, and he ended up destroying his liver because he started drinking. Now he's he's on the other side of it now, but we're talking 2005, we're now in 2020.
Yeah.
And then me, what I was able to do now, I can pat myself. I won't pat myself on the back for this, in the sense that it wasn't just done for me, but Jeremy keeps coming up, and I realized that this hit me, but it didn't destroy me.
Right.
And I had a choice, because if I crawled in the corner in the fetal position and say, this is it, then that was how Jeremy would start to learn how to deal with adversity.
Yeah.
And so what I ended up doing is sitting him down and saying, hey, dude, man, this is what happened. And your dad made some mistakes. We're going to come back from it and we'll be okay. And I knew that the skills that brought me there to earn the money, to make the money, to do investing, could rebuild it. So the two things that happened is then I re-engaged with the principles. I re-engaged with the work that I was doing, but I also went back in and said, what are all the patterns that I have done that create this uncertainty, the lack of confidence, all of those things, and say, I either got to strip those away or educate those away. And so within 18 months, we recovered everything that we lost, and 3x'd what we had originally started with. And it was by using universal principles and dedication, discipline. But really the catalyst was I knew Jeremy was watching me. Yeah.
I mean, kids are such a, it's going to sound bad, but I was going to say powerful tool, but obviously they're not tools, but they also are. They're great motivations and great reasons for doing things, and will force us to do things that we wouldn't normally do, and that's one of the things I tell people all the time is, if you aren't able to go after your dreams, how on earth are you going to expect your children to go after their dreams? It just doesn't make any sense. One thing that I found pretty interesting with that story too, is that you lost a third of so you still had 2/3 of your income, net worth, or whatever you want to call it there, which I think is really smart. And I also know, you always are very careful with things that you do. So it's never all eggs in one basket. And I know it's a lot of what you teach. And also, about a year or two ago, maybe it's 2 years now, you got diagnosed with cancer. And I know you had to front a lot of that income, or not income, but the money for the bills yourself. And it didn't destroy you. And I know that's one of the things that you teach people now, is how do we set things up in case something happens, in case we are victim to something, or cancer comes up, or something, you never know, like an accident or whatever. So I would love to transition into, how do people start to build something like you've built, so when things come up in life, we're not scrambling, or, for lack of a better word, screwed?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, one of the first things is to realize that life can happen.
Yeah.
You know, no one in my family has ever had cancer. It was those were the last 3 words I ever thought I'd hear. You have cancer. I lived, you knew me, you know me, that I lived a relatively healthy life, working out, eating right, doing the right things. And all of a sudden, you know, I find I have cancer things. And everything was going great. You know, I was masterminding with top people. I'm speaking on the biggest stages, finishing a 6-figure launch, all that stuff going on. And then all of a sudden life happens, and it's easy. And I could have been one of those that says that cancer is not going to happen to me. It doesn't happen to my family, you know?
Right. Yep.
Well, it doesn't have to be cancer. It could be COVID. It could be anything that life decides to give you a detour. The question is, are you prepared for it? And what I mean by that is that if your sole source of income and your way of supporting yourself, your family, and your loved ones has the ability to get cut off, then that becomes a single point of failure. And so what we need to think about is, how do we scale and build multiple income streams? And I talk about the 5 incomes, but how do you build multiple income streams that aren't, and I don't use the term passive, because passive insinuates that you can just forget about it. And I truly believe that if you forget about your income and your money, it will forget about you. Yeah. So I use the term leveraged. So the more leveraged my income can be, that means the less active role I have in it, but I'll always check the pulse on the patient. I will always be involved in it. So they can't take advantage of me. And the bottom line is that I'll always be, and you always should be, the captain of your ship, and advisors and everyone else, they're your first mate, and they're the people up there helping you navigate, but the decisions and the steering are all yours. So the first thing I think is to accept the fact that life can happen.
Yep.
The second thing is that if that's the case, then how do I live my life differently so I can put something away to build something? Now we start off, you know, everyone talks about an emergency fund and all that type of stuff. And I agree. I call it a peace of mind fund.
Yep.
Because and when we talk about it, so many people will say 3 to 6 months, and you're going to say that I'm conservative, but I think I've been proven right. I think that especially entrepreneurs in this type of space too, you need 9 to 18 months. So call it 12 months. And the reason I say that is because when it first happens, something happens, you're in shock. You're dealing with it. So I need money put aside to deal with the shock period, the paralysis period. Then I can look at the evaluation period, and then I can do the action period where I'm going after and doing things, and give myself, you know, a good 3 months in each, 3 to 4 months in each, to give me the breathing room to live. And so no one ever said I'm going to be broke because I have too much in my emergency fund, in my peace of mind fund.
Right.
So I think one of the first things we ought to do is to make sure that we have that in place. Now, if you have debt though, I would say that we want to get rid of destructive debt. And what do I mean by destructive debt? Destructive debt is that debt which is robbing your future so you can live your lifestyle today. So it's consumables. It's us putting things on credit cards that are, you know, luxury boats, luxury cars that maybe we can't afford, shopping sprees, that type of stuff. They're consumable that in a week, 2 weeks, a month, or a year, there's no value to them versus productive debt. Right. So I'm not one that says all debt is bad. Right. I am one that, you know, but productive debt is debt that's used that will increase your cash flow or your net worth, your wealth over time. So what is productive debt? Putting Facebook ads on a credit card when you know that you have a 4x return on investment is productive debt, because it's going to increase your cash flow. Yeah. Possibly using debt to buy a piece of equipment that's going to increase your productivity or your efficiency is going to increase your profitability. productive debt. Now, there is one thing in common with all debt, productive debt and destructive debt. All debt costs. It's going to cost you. It's called interest.
Right.
And so to the extent that we can do things without debt, the better off we are. And so I try to do things without debt. And when you do things with cash, it gives you a whole lot of room to negotiate when you start to do that.
Yeah, which I love. Like negotiating is definitely a trait I've taken out of your book. And with everything, like going into car dealerships or like just anything and everything, I have an opportunity to negotiate. I definitely do. So I love that. And I remember talking to you and I was like, hey, we have a bunch of equity in the house. If I refinance the house, take some cash out, use that as a down payment on another house, is that a good thing to do? And you didn't necessarily say it was a good thing, but you said, I think this would go into your bucket of productive debt or something like that. It's like you're using something that you're obviously going to pay interest on that, but you're using it to build more wealth. And so in that case, it's something that, yeah, sure, is not, like might be something to consider. So I love all that. What is there anything else besides that you think a lot of entrepreneurs should be kind of focusing on when it comes to their money? Like what types of investments are good? Like just,
I think before we get to the investment piece, I think that the next thing that they need to look at is take a really hard look at their expense structure.
Mm.
So really looking at where the money is going. So you get a real clear idea of what I call your wants and your needs are.
Yeah.
The problem is that we interpret wants as needs, and therefore we don't start cutting things. When I got diagnosed with cancer, I said, well, I'm curious. Let's figure out what does it take for us to live. And I went through and I put them in wants and needs columns, and I've done this exercise repeatedly, but I just said, let's just look at it. If I can't work for a little while, which is what we decided to do I have the investment machine to produce enough to take care of the needs first, the wants second? And so that's the thing. And so we need to be really, really, really honest with ourselves, because you can sit back and justify why you want to spend X dollars a month on something. Look, I got news for you. Netflix is a want. It's not a need. You can go without it. And what we fail to do is to understand the implications of our financial decisions. And I'll give you an example. You might look at things and say, hey, I think I'm going to go get this new car. Do you need a new car? No, I don't need a new car. I actually love my car, but I thought I'd get a new car. It's going to cost me $200 more a month. Right. All right. Well, here's what the people make the mistake is they look at $200 a month and say it's a $200 a month decision. It's not. It's a much bigger decision, because $200 a month invested over time, say over 30 years, $200 a month for over 30 years at 8%, it turns into over $300,000. So your decision to spend $200 a month, whether it's on cable or car or something else, $200 a month is not a $200 a month decision. It's a $300,000 plus decision. And when you start to look at that, you can then make the decision, say, I'm conscious, I'm aware, and I'm intentionally knowing that I'm going to make this decision, knowing that it will cost me $300,000 in the future.
Wow. Yeah. No one looks at it that way ever.
Nope.
It's always just, here's the cost of it.
And I think you and I talked about this, where I said, be careful about this, because our salespeople, our credit card people, our Amazons and all of that, they understand this thing called the payment game, that when you go on the car lot, one of the first things they're going to ask you is say, what kind of payment are you looking for?
Oh, I know.
If they know that you're they know what payment you're looking for, they're going to play the math game on you. But you think it's okay because you're making a payment decision. I said, don't play the payment game.
I remember when we went to go buy I guess we're leasing it, but we'll buy it at the end of the lease. But our Yukon, and the lady who came in, she's like, so the first question, what kind of payment are you looking? Like once you knew we were interested, what kind of payment are you looking for? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And she goes, well, once we know the payment, we can start working on getting something that's going to work for you. And I said, well, honestly, I can afford any payment. So I don't really care about what the payment is. And she's like, well, let's just get a number. And I was like, honestly, I'm more concerned about what the final price is that I'm paying on this thing. And she goes, oh, but don't worry about the monthly payment. And I drove in my Jag and I was like, see that Jaguar over there? She's like, yeah. I'm like, that's my car. And that's like $800 a month or whatever. I'm like, I don't really care what the payment is. And she looks at me and she goes, well, this is going to be fun, isn't it? she knew I knew what I was doing, and yep. We ended up like negotiating, I remember I called you up. I'm like, what do I do? And I just did everything you told me to do. And we ended up getting it for like $13,000 off of like the sticker price. And yep. Here's one thing I learned, Mel, and I'm sure you know this too. When you're going in to negotiate a car, unless you're talking to the manager, you're getting ripped off because the manager is the only person who can go to certain levels on the car, and the manager will go to certain levels to sell you that car. So if you're talking to the salesperson the entire time, you're getting ripped off. And so I learned that day because she told me, she's like, I didn't think he was going to go that low. And I was just like, oh, really? And she's like, well, she told me, she's like, I can only go so low. And then he has to come in, and I couldn't believe that he went that low. But that's the whole thing is just, I think what it comes down to, Mel, is just understanding how the game works. And a lot of people just don't take the time to learn the game at all. And then I tell people that's what it is. Life is a game, business is a game, money is a game. Take the time to learn the game.
I totally agree. And play the game, understand the rules and play the game.
Yeah. I love that. So Mel, what I want to do, because we're already past an hour. What I want to do is, if you're up for it, I want to have you on for a second episode. And what I would love to talk about in that episode is what's the next step? Like, how do we actually start to structure this, no matter where we are in our entrepreneurial journey, to like build savings? What should we be looking for? How do we put money away for taxes? And kind of get into the nitty gritty. I know this episode was a lot of story and background, but can we get it more tactical in the next episode? Are you up for that?
I'm totally game for that.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. So let's do that on a second episode. For right now, for anyone who would love to learn more about you, maybe opt in for some of your stuff, where can they go?
They can find me. So I'm on the Instagram, Mel Abraham 9.
Yep.
I've got a Facebook group called the Affluent Entrepreneur that I do posting and stuff in there. I also have, for those of you that are dealing with debt, I also have a debt breakthrough calculator that can give you an idea of how to pay down your debt, the order to pay it down, and that type of thing that you can go to. That is melabraham.com/NGE for New Generation Entrepreneur. I'm not sure where that came from.
I don't know. And guys,
you find me. Yeah. I mean, I'm on social and all that. And I love to hear from you.
Amazing. And if you guys do have any debt, please go grab that thing right now. I'll tell you, I've been through it all. I've been broke. I've been in debt. And getting the right things in the right order just brings such a peace of mind. I know people say money doesn't bring happiness, but I can tell you it's a lot easier being happy when you know your money's secure, your future's secure, things are secure. It's much easier to just live a very happy life when that stuff is in order. So please go do that now. And Mel, thank you so much for being here with us. And I look forward to the next episode. Thanks, buddy.
Oh man, thanks for having me. And I look forward to it too, man.
Cool. All right, guys, if you have not done so already, go over to iTunes, leave us a review, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of The New Generation Entrepreneur. Take care.